This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Well, welcome to another unbelievable episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. I say this most every episode, but the opportunity of hosting a podcast, I mean, who knew? Back in the day, when I was growing up, I didn't even know what a podcast was. Didn't know what a podcast was really until like 2006, 2007, and I sure wasn't going to ever do one. And then, I certainly wasn't going to be a guest on one, and definitely not going to host one because I couldn't really know the difference between a podcast or even a blog or a vlog or all those things. And now I'm a host of this podcast, and it really has been wonderful to be a host. And the main thing that happens in this podcast is that I get to meet some of the most extraordinary people that the world has to offer. You know that, and I know that, but sometimes the people who are coming on don't actually know yet that they're extraordinary, or they don't know that some of the people I've interviewed are just off the charts extraordinary, because we don't always know ourselves as that. But today, I'm quite certain we have another opportunity to be with an interview with just a spectacular human being. Now, I could give you some backdrop of what's led us to be on this particular podcast today, because it's kind of interesting, right? I mean, you have to get Stefan. It's kind of interesting how we're talking right now, after all.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of fun. It's very, very spontaneous. Minimal planning, but we have both vetted out each other a little bit, and we've never really had any kind of long conversation with each other, only certain that we could trust each other to have a great conversation because of, mutual interests and who we know ourselves to be and the men that we are and the healers that we are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my listeners and you, my listeners, to our guest today, and that is Stefan Malecek. So Stefan Malecek, welcome to Humanity podcast. It's an honor and pleasure to have you as a guest. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Fred. I'm excited and honored to be here.
It's really, really great to be here, and it's great to be here with you. Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation. Welcome to humanity. Here's the thing, Stefan. I'm about to hit you with a question. I told you I'm going to be gentle with you, and this is actually an extremely simple question. The whole question has less than 10 letters in it. Really. The entire grammatically correct question has less than 10 letters in it. So how hard could it be? I mean, in the end, it's just not that difficult to answer a question that, I can get done in 9 letters. And I'm about to do that. So Welcome to Humanity has seen this question before, but you might not have. And off we go. Stefan Malecek, who are you?
I was anticipating you. So let's see. I'm another pilgrim on planet Earth, working my way through my own, as Buffy St. Marie would say, I'm working my own way through my own day, and all I dare say is it's my own. So,
beautiful.
Thank you. And I identify as a healer and a writer, and I have written 3 nonfictions, and I'm working on my 8th novel right now. And there's some level on which I think that my history lends itself well to helping others heal, because I've had to do so much work of my own to heal. I'm currently deeply involved with Mankind Project. I'm the Hawaii State Elder for Mankind Project, and I'm also a soon-to-be elected board member for the Boys to Men Project, which we work with 13 to 18-year-olds.
Right.
On some levels relatively, and on some other levels completely devoted to healing myself and others.
That is really cool. So I don't even know which one to start with. We have you as a Mankind Project and Boys to Men and a writer and a pilgrim, an elder and a healer. That's great. And you get all of those are tangents that we could go off with very, very richly in any of those directions. And perhaps we will. And now I'm going to ask you to name one more, like something you haven't tapped on yet, not an extension of something. If you can get it here,
Sure.
It's like something that is not an extension of something you've already said.
Vietnam vet.
Thank you. Beautiful. Wow. What a great answer. Like, stop the show. What a great answer. Dude.
Well, thank you.
Now we're talking. That is fabulous. I love that. Look, we didn't rehearse that. That is just a killer answer. And I totally appreciate it. There's something like a stop in my tracks. Like, oh, yeah, I actually knew that I saw it and I was buzzing through your bio. It isn't what I thought you would say. It's just fabulous. So what state do you live in?
I live on Maui in Hawaii.
Maui, Hawaii. And how long have you been in the islands?
7 years next month.
7 years. Okay, cool. And where were you living before you were in Hawaii?
I lived on the north coast of Oregon for 21 years. And prior to that, I was in San Francisco the Bay Area for 23 years.
Wow. Okay. So you're Hawaiian on top of it. On top of all this stuff, you're like, okay, we've already listed it. I'm not going to have to go through it redundantly. Now, Stefan, I'm going to ask you an easier question, which is you get to go on the astral plane here. You get to tell us with which spoke you want to talk about a little bit. And any of these are here. There's healer, there's writer, there's Mankind Project, there's Boys to Men, there's Vietnam vet, there's Hawaiian, and, and others that you've tapped on. Where should we go next? Take us down one of these roads.
Okay. I've just newly revised my book on shame. It's called The Crucible of Shame, Healing the Societal Roots of Addiction and, quote, mental illness. I think I'd really like to talk about that spoke, as you say, a little bit, because to me, there is a shame base that infects most of humanity and gives rise concurrently or subsequently, rather, all of what we call addictions and most of what we call mental illness arises out of the sense of shame, which I define as the felt sense of not being worthy of being loved.
Okay, say that again now. Let's say that one. That's amazing. And so run that by me again. This is like your definition rather than
yes,
Merriam-Webster or something. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead again.
Shame is the felt sense of not being worthy of being loved.
That is fabulous. I get it. So, and then you say that's at the roots of nearly all, if not all, addictions, and nearly all, if not all, mental illness.
Well, I say all addictions right up front. The most prominent and untreated and unrecognized addiction that we suffer from as a united humanity is greed. Greed arises directly out of not having one's deepest emotional needs met as a child and as an infant and child.
And now you're saying, I'm almost hearing you say that it's ubiquitously universal.
Yes.
Like not very many people get to escape that one.
No one.
Interesting. And we're talking about 7.8 billion people. We're not talking about Americans or Westerns, or we're talking about everybody. Yeah.
Yes. It's a world system that has been infected for, I don't know, thousands of years. And
interesting.
As nearly as I can trace it, the last truly egalitarian culture that we had on this planet, which was not shame-based, was about 8,000 years ago in the Minoan culture in Crete.
In Crete?
Yeah, 8,000 years ago.
Okay, so 8,000 years, that's longer than most of us have even been alive. So that's a long time ago. What's the documentation of that culture? If it wasn't shame-based, what did it not have, or what did it have that our present cultures,
It was primarily matrilineal.
Of course, that makes sense.
And with the collapse of the Minoan culture came the influx of essentially Eastern European male-dominated culture with their male gods who required bloodshed and damage and harm and retribution and punishment and strict obedience. It was the cultural shift revolved around the religious or spiritual shift. Instead of worshiping the all-effulgent goddess who gave everyone everything they needed all the time, it became a shame-based religion that required obedience in order to be given the meager minimum, if that. And it gave rise to all kinds of things like, capitalism. I have a lot to say about capitalism too, but we'll hold on to that for a moment.
No, go ahead. Say an ounce about it. You can't bring it up and not tell us a little more about it.
All right. Well, so according to, oh God, what's his name? Can't think of it. Kavanaugh. I have a lot of this is all in my book. I have two versions, by the way. I have been working on a more friendly, let's call it. Crucible is really fairly academic. I've just completed a new one called Getting Free of Shame, which is going to be more of a self-help sort of version of Crucible and a lot more accessible. Advanced capitalism depends on continuous growth. It's kind of like a shark. Keep swimming in order to stay alive. Continuous growth implies continually finding both new products and services to exploit and outlets for such products and services. So, for example, here's a real simple example. It used to be when you went on an airplane, you checked your bags.
Right.
Now it's been unbundled. We have to pay for our bags now. So they found a new way to make more money out of the same existing system. Very simple example, but it's one of trillions.
Yeah. Yeah. This idea of growth, you're saying it's an outpicturing or an outgrowth of a shame-based society? I'm trying to get this.
Okay. If one is treated as a child in a shaming manner, and no one is born shamed.
Of course not. Yes, you're not born with it, right?
There's a process called the proximal cause, and the proximal cause of all shame is a broken trust.
Okay.
Usually by someone with whom one had emotional ties and a relationship of some sort.
It seems that would likely be one of your two parents more than anyone else.
Yeah, it could be. Usually is. It doesn't necessarily have to be.
Okay.
I mean, it could be your older sister. It could be your Uncle Joe. It could, anybody. I mean, anybody.
Family primarily, then, even if you step away from your parents, someone in your family typically.
Well, or let's not go too far into indicting the Catholic Church, but it could be your friendly neighborhood priest.
Yes. Okay. And so does this happen in infancy, or does it happen later on in early years, or what?
Well, so according to, can't remember his name right now.
No worries.
he took a year off as a psychologist. He took a year off when his son was born. This is 1962, because he wanted to spend his time with his newborn son. And so he took photographs, thousands and thousands of photographs of his son going through all these developmental stages. He documented the fact, what he said was, we were born with 9 inherent affects, which are which give us the ability to develop emotions. They precurse emotions. And one of the things he said was his son was 2 hours old, and he farted, and he turned his head and wrinkled his nose, which is the distinguishing sign of disgust. The opposite of gusto is disgust or disgust. And so that was one of the signs that his son, at 2 hours old, had the ability to distinguish something that was unpleasant. And disgust is considered to be one of the 9 forms of shame. Anyway, wow. so yeah, I don't want to get too far off track here. But so he said, anyway, so he took these thousands and thousands of photographs. He published this book in 1963, I believe it was. And he did studies of children around the world in every culture. And all children have the same 9 inborn affects. All children. Yes. And until the child's ability to trust is broken, they are magical. We are all magical children until our trust is broken. And with a child, it's very easy to break trust because they're very delicate, they're very gentle for the most part, and because the prefrontal cortex does not begin operating until around the age of 7. That's why the Catholic Church and other, people call it the age of reason. Is that people don't really begin to think until they're about 7. Okay. Up until that point, we're pretty much magical.
Interesting. Yeah. So now this word magical, I'm going to ask you to just, splice that one up a little bit for us.
Okay. So magical thinking in psychology is considered to be, if I believe it to be so, it is so. So then I tend to believe that I create my own reality simply by thinking of it. And children do that in a certain way. But if I cry, I'm hungry, I cry, mom feeds me. Wow, miracle. That's magical.
Yeah.
Right? And by the same token, children consider their parents and other adults to be godlike. Because, wow, mom can drive a car. Wow, mom can use a can opener. Mom can cook me a good meal. Wow, that's magical because that's way beyond my scope of ability at that young, tender age.
So again, I'm trying to get the cascade down here. So we're really not talking, the trust breach. Are we talking about it happening typically at 5, 6, 7 years old? Or are we talking about an earlier breach and, pre-verbally maybe? Huh?
Usually, yeah. The more severely the trust is broken, the more severe Sylvan Tompkins was the fellow's name. I just thought of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. The earlier the break in trust and the more severe the break in trust, the more severe the mental illness, quote.
Okay.
I share Thomas Zazz's understanding of what we call mental illness. Mm-hmm. For example, they've done studies with people who have what's called dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. They have generally found that about 90+% of these people who develop these particular symptoms have been severely physically and or sexually abused before the age of 3.
Wow.
This is an interesting one. This is Thomas Zaz on addiction. He says, when we consider whether drug addiction is a disease, we are concerned with what causes the drug to get into the body. It's quite irrelevant what the drug does after it's in the body. This uncontroversial fact is quite distinct from any claim that the activity itself is a disease. A simple test of a true physical disease is whether it can be shown to exist in a corpse. No such identifiable pathology has been found in the bodies of heavy drinkers and drug addicts. This alone justifies the view that addiction is not a physical disease. I don't know this is something that's not really well known. So the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual #1 came out in 1952, and it was designed to be a nosology for clinicians to make it easier to diagnose and hence easier to bill insurance companies, which were demanding some kind of diagnostic fundament in order to bill. And so what they did was gathered together like Menninger and a few of these other old school psychiatrists, all white men over 60, very well-to-do, all doctors, all upper class, and they defined mental illness.
Yep.
And in effect, what they said is, if we do not have it, it is mentally ill.
Yeah. So you're kind of saying like mental illness as a function of the eye of the beholder more than as anything that could conceivably be found either in a corpse or in reality, actually, other than in conversation.
Yes, and it's done by inference.
I see. Yeah.
There's no specific test for schizophrenia, for example. Only what the DSM and all these distinguished white doctors really basically said was schizophrenia. There is no test. There's no lab test for bipolar, for example.
I understand.
So all of these things, including the psychopharmacology industry, have sprung up as profit-making medicalizations of human behavior.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and I'm not too far off in the pot and kettle and black conversation. Okay. And I just want to let you know that one of the things I hear you reverberating here is questioning the whole source of the prevailing conversation of what mental health and what mental illness really are, what the agreement reality is about what these things really are or aren't. You're really questioning the source from the ground up.
Yes, 100%. I worked on psychiatric units for 17 and a half years before I went back to school and got my doctorate. I have firsthand experience. I gave meds for 15 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I have firsthand knowledge and experience. I'm not kind of coming out of some book or somebody else's,
No. This is the stuff that you've seen, you've smelled, you've heard, you've hugged, you've dealt with, you've spoken to, you've listened to. This is your life. I don't doubt that at all. Yes. And look, what I really want to get here is, and help me out here, is that when you're speaking to this new book, this shame-based infection, Darrelly, in some ways it's a shame. It's a universal, ubiquitous, traumatic event that happens to nearly, if not each and every of the 7.8 billion humans walking on the planet today.
Yes.
That creates some fracture in how one perceives the world, such that greed might be the first thing that occurs, but there's an injury here. There's something that leaves us less than we were before it happened.
It's an addictive process by which we attempt to become whole. So, for example, if you feel insignificant, shitty, worthless, and deficient, and you shoot up a bunch of cocaine, and for about 45 minutes you feel like you're the king of the world, and you have this incredible sexual prowess, and you have these magnanimous ideas about how you're going to become a billionaire overnight, that might be considered, in a certain sense, a, quote, fix.
Interesting.
You've temporarily fixed your problems of inadequacy and insecurity. Is it real? Well, I don't think so, generally. And so addictions always leave you hungry for more. That's why they call it a, quote, fix. You fix it for 10, if you're lucky, 5 or 6 hours. With really good heroin, you might get 5 hours.
Yeah.
But, at some point you got to, quote, come down. And when you start coming down, it's because the effect of the drug is no longer working. And so you have to go back and get some more. The problem is what's called upregulation and downregulation. So your cells, before you first use any drug or any substance, that your cells are wide open. And so you ingest some kind of substance and your cells load up and they close their little windows. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's downregulation. Mm-hmm. And so then next time you go back and you try to use the same amount, it won't work because your windows on your cells, the beta windows on your cells are closed. They will not be, so you have to use more to get at least approach that effect.
Right. Well, let me ask another question here, because I got this upregulation and downregulation and tolerance, and what used to work yesterday doesn't work tomorrow, and it's because I need more or I crave more.
Sure.
And and that it's a temporary, and you can see here why it's called a fix. Actually, it's a temporary fix.
Yes.
And it does fix things. And this is what I want to point to.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really love to hear your opinion. On the one hand, what we have is this, ubiquitous, universal, inescapable fracture injury. Mm-hmm. And then we have the seeking for relief from that level of despair,
yes.
An opportunity or a desperate search for becoming whole again, magical yes. again, perhaps is even another way to look at this.
Yes.
And that the drugs themselves, in the two you've named, and maybe you've named a couple more, but at least in the heroin and cocaine, and then the opiates and the stimulants, and then we got all these designer drugs now, and all these different ways, even cannabis as the use as it is now. And the drugs you saw in Vietnam versus the drugs that we're seeing at the dispensaries, or the drugs that we're seeing, there's drugs everywhere. There's drugs everywhere.
Well, and let's not discount what are called the process addictions. Addiction to overwork, to sex.
I'm going to go there in just a second. Let me ask a question here and see if we can answer this, because, it's pretty simple in the mechanical world to ingest some of these fixes. Mm-hmm. Like they're sitting there in a bottle at the store, or they're sitting there in a sack, or they're sitting there in a vial, or they're sitting there in a red light district, or they're sitting there in a cubicle, or they're sitting there on a computer. Like there are countless access to these things that will, at least for the sake of this conversation, call fixes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely agree.
And they work. They work. They work for this short period of time. They give you an experience, reality or not, an experience that the flat tire has air in it, or that the injury no longer is bleeding, or that the deficiency no longer is scarce. Like those kinds of things. Actually, the experience, like a confirmation of a subjective notion that things just got better when I used whatever I used or did whatever I did. Yes?
Because one has disinhibited one's brain.
Go ahead. Take me down that. I'll play that game with you. Take me down that hole a little bit. Yeah.
So let's use the most common addiction of all, alcohol.
Yeah.
Alcohol kills directly or indirectly kills 3 million people in the United States every year.
That's a lot.
And yet it is completely legal, sold everywhere, et cetera, taxed, et cetera, et cetera. And so what happens when you reach the point of intoxication is that you have effectively disinhibited your medulla oblongata at the base of the brain, which sends signals to your prefrontal cortex, which makes executive decisions of the highest order. And when you disconnect it, you allow your limbic system, the amygdala, the cingulate cortex, etc., free rein. And so anything that has been the most basic impulses, sometimes called conscience, are mediated or regulated by the limbic system. So if you put your limbic system in charge, any kind of weird, anything that seems like a good idea is likely to happen and actually maybe even manifest. oh, gee, it's a good idea. I'm drunk enough I can drive 100 miles an hour.
I see.
For example. So you have not really, quote, fixed the problem. You have temporarily disinhibited your brain in order to believe that you fixed the problem.
Interesting. Okay, got it. So it's not an actual fix. It's a removal of the experience that something is wrong.
Or the awareness of it, yes.
Yeah, the awareness, yes. Okay, cool. All right, I could see that. And this cycle seems like, well, that's the best I have. That's the thing what I have. I got alcohol, I got my hookers, I've got my friends, I've got my cocaine, I got my my heroin. I've got, my pot, or I've got my work, or, all the alcoholics that are out there, my tobacco or whatever, it goes on and on, of course. What I'm hearing is that this cycle sure does seem like it's like particularly self-perpetuating. And then I hear you in your book introducing maybe something different, like another way to come at this injury, that people who are interested in choosing another way, or in like looking at a way of actually getting on the other side of this shame, might have access to. This is something that maybe if we read your book or listen to what you have to say, we could take a different route than this self-perpetuating cycle. What do you say to that?
I say that, healing shame is the key to true mental health. And healing shame requires that one become conversant with one's own deepest needs and desires, and become willing to mourn, to grieve the loss of essential human vitality to early and repetitive shame incidents.
Interesting.
Because what happens with shame is, if in the moment you're injured, you do not express your fear, shame, hurt, anger, whatever, if you do not express it, it becomes internalized.
Yeah, it's permanent, or at least it appears to be permanent. It's not. I get that it's not.
It has an effect. And thousands of times I've heard, oh, it doesn't matter, that was so long ago, or, oh, I just want to forget all about it, or, oh, it was all in the past, blah, blah, blah. I say bulwark to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Much stronger term than that. But, because that's not true. All of these things have hormones and neurochemicals that are related to them. And when we don't act them out, do not express our fear, shame, hurt, outrage, pain, etc., it is internalized.
Excellent.
And that's the direct, I believe, causative factor of most, of all autoimmune diseases, cancer being, lupus erythematosus, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. All of those are the direct result of not expurgating harmful emotion, because we're not allowed to. We're taught not to. We're taught to protect mommy and daddy. We're taught to protect big daddy and mommy government. We're taught to protect all these so-called authorities. We're taught not to shame them for having shamed us. So we become the repositories of generations and generations of shame. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like walking around with a 50-pound bag of rocks around your waist.
Yeah.
And proclaiming to all and sundry that you're perfectly healthy and everything is wonderful, even though you can't bend over, your legs are too stiff, or your arms are too stiff, or you get dizzy when you bend over because, well, I'm carrying all this shame and I'm being a good little boy or a good little girl.
All right, I got that. So listen. Let me ask you this, which is, I really hear it. I hear the load that shame has on my being. And then, I even hear the humanity's brotherhood of each and every one of us carrying around our own version of the same load. So there's something like that. Okay.
Yes.
Then I get this next question, which is, So recently, I've been doing a couple things. I like growing and developing, or at least fooling myself, or illusions that I'm growing and developing. Exploring spiritual growth, or exploring personal growth, or physical growth. These kinds of things that seem to be headed towards purifying, or giving myself a life that matters, or making me a more considerable contribution in the world. I like all that. Okay. And recently I've been looking at a couple different things, including breath work, or, DMT releasing, or even, we certainly in our field as healers, you can't get too far around the corner without hearing about the possible curative value of the sacred plant medicines, psilocybin, ayahuasca, cannabis, those kinds of things.
Yes.
Is it like, talk to us for a minute or two about how do I get under the roots of this shame so that I can become part of that culture that you're talking about from 8,000 years ago?
It's part of why LSD has been vilified and demonized and was made illegal in 1966, because it allowed for a moment, and studies show that LSD disappears from your system in less than a minute. The actual LSD is gone within a minute, but what it does is it triggers certain neurological pathways that remove or allow for a moment the cultural impact and cultural mandates to be seen in a different format. They allow you to see beyond the common, ordinary conditions of living that we call, quote, reality. And so that's why they've been made illegal, because specifically the United States government did not want anybody to wake up to what was really going on, so they could continue their own agendas, let's call it. And I have used all of these one time or another. Of course. I mean, I'm coming up Christmas Day. I'll be 38 years clean from cocaine.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I last took LSD May the 11th, 1979. So, all of that for me is long in the past, because as Ram Dass used to say, about LSD particularly, he says, you take LSD and you go through the door, and you go through the door, and you go through the door, and you go through the door. Eventually, you have to decide not to keep going through the door, but to get down to work on what you saw on the other side of the door.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that for me was that I was carrying tremendous, tremendous burden of shame and self-hatred and the inability to love myself positively and healthily. And this goes back to the unfinished part I was talking about before about capitalism and greed, is that we are taught to believe that more is better. More money, bigger house, better watch, we call it a trophy wife, blah, 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 blah. So it's always a matter of some level of commerce. Our lives become commercialized because what we're pursuing is not spiritual excellence. We're pursuing capitalism and material, a large material plane. For the most part, we are never encouraged to be spiritual.
That's right.
We are encouraged to be material and to be obedient and to be respectful of the current culture.
Yeah, you can see that everywhere.
Which I think is insane, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Krishnamurti once said that to seek to be sane in an insane society is insane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the essence of illness to be sane in an insane society. That's right.
That's right. The key point to all of this, Fred, is that we seek outside of ourselves that which is inherently who we are and from whom we have been distracted by, money, sex, fame, whatever. And so we never really seek within ourselves what we seek outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's why, you get 500-pound people or people with 99 Cadillacs or whatever it happens to be, and they're not satisfied. I guarantee you that what's his name, Zuckerman, whatever his name is, he just got certified, to be one of the first American trillionaires.
Yeah.
And he made some, I was reading the other day, he made something like $48 billion in one quarter last year.
Yeah.
And is he happy? I very seriously doubt it.
Yeah. Well, not because of the 48 billion for sure.
No, there's never enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I reached, let me give you a little example. I reached a point with cocaine where I said, if I could just get enough ahead that I could buy $1 million worth of cocaine and shut myself off in a room all by myself for a year with this $1 million worth of cocaine. And I was doing freebase at the time, and just keep smoking and smoke cocaine, smoke $1 million worth of cocaine, that I would somehow be happy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally delusional, but that's where I was at the time. I thought that there could be enough, that $1 million worth of cocaine for myself alone would be enough.
So the challenge of the world, the challenge that we're all facing together is this particular challenge. Given that the sample size of this condition is 7.8 billion,
Mm-hmm.
and given that there are so many opportunities to at least explore the possibility that what I really want is out there rather than in here.
Mm-hmm.
And given that, the access to this possibility, as well as the experience of it temporarily working,
Mm-hmm.
that combination, is so ruthlessly, spirally lethal.
Yes.
That it's almost like that would probably have to be called the paramount challenge of living in this astral plane at the present time.
Well, I always refer to it as the addictive model, because that's the one that really makes the most sense to me. So let us say that 7.7 billion people on this planet are all addicts of some form or some sort or another. That's saying that there's maybe 0.01% of the planet who are not addicted. And so I generally say that, as for the individual as well as for global society, until we hit bottom as a planet, nothing is going to change.
Mm.
Because it's not until I hit bottom with countless drugs and other addictions, and I was sitting there with no resources and no money and no cocaine in particular instance, and nowhere and no how to get any, and in trouble with all my connections, and spurned by the community that used to support me facetiously, that I had to raise my hands in the air and say, please help me.
Yeah.
Because I had nowhere else to go, Fred.
It
was not until I hit the utter bottom. I had nowhere to go.
I really get it.
And that's when I woke up.
Okay, so why should anyone give a shit? I mean, that's not happening around the corner. That's not, why, like if who cares if I read your book when there's an ounce of cocaine waiting for me around the corner? Why, who cares? I mean, it's not going to work anyways until the whole planet figures out that we're bottom, and what's here for me to even consider possibility?
I write to and speak to those who have some glimmer of awakening, some level of desire to, quit being addicted, to quit being strung out, to try to find some other healthier, better way to live than, score and steal and buy and shoot and score, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like there was those commercials. Which I think they should bring back from the 80s, when this guy's in his business suit is standing there and he's got a tuner in his hand, and there's a yacht sitting on his table, and he snorts up the yacht, and then there's this big mansion sitting on his table, and he snorts up the mansion, and he's like, and then I think the voiceover was something like, I got to do more cocaine so I can make more money, so I can work longer, so I can make some more money to buy more cocaine.
Yeah.
It's an endless cycle. It's
self-perpetuating.
Yes, yeah. Exactly that. And so I write and speak to those who are looking for something different.
Yeah, I got it.
And I can only speak to my own experience. And what I've come to understand, and that is this. In Mankind Project, we say, changing the world one man at a time. And I am that person.
Thank you.
I cannot change anyone else. All I can do is be a shining example of what I believe to be true and beautiful.
Thank you. And this is where I was going to go. I appreciate you taking us right to this pinnacle, because really, like, what's here for me? What's here for my listeners? What's here for today? I'm talking for the next minute. There's some people out here who are listening to this broadcast right now who are, struggling either with addictions or with their recent losses or with their shame, of course. And like, what's in it for me right now? Like, what's here to do in my next first step, in this first step of the world that is actually unfolding in front of me from here forward? What's here for our listeners and myself, actually, to consider doing or being or having, so that I can now have some form of hope or release or relief or at least purpose or contribution in this planet, on this planet?
Well, yeah. No, I understand. This is going to seem a little bit counterintuitive, Fred, but if you're still interested in drinking and drugging, then I say go out and drink and drug.
Yeah, just go do it.
Do it until it runs out of your goddamn earlobes.
Yeah.
Until you're finally done. I get people all the time calling up, I'm 3 days sober, man. Blah, blah, blah. Or, my line is, I will not take anybody who's not at least a year clean and sober into any kind of therapeutic practice. Because I know that first year, they've done autopsies on chronic users. They have found that it takes 7.5 months for alcohol to leave your brain pan.
Interesting.
So for 7 months is around the time when people who get clean get re-addicted. And they found that with chronic cocaine crack smokers, that it actually leaves a layer of residue in your lungs, so that even after you stop using, you're still absorbing crack cocaine into your body. So I would say, you have to be a year clean and sober before I'll even talk to you. I mean, I'll talk to you, but I won't work with you until you're at least a year clean and sober, because it's easy to fall back into addictions. Mm-hmm. And so unless you're completely convinced, I get people calling me all the time, my son needs some help, blah, blah, my daughter needs to get into, no. Does she want to quit? No. Does he want to quit? No. Well, then there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do for you except recommend a few books, or I'll chat with them, but I'm not going to take them into treatment because there's nothing you can do if they still want to use. Mm-hmm. So it takes getting to the point where you want to stop using, because the using is only the first step. There's all kinds of layers of stuff underneath of it that is the real key, and that's what I more specialize in, the underneath stuff.
That's great. So one of the things that you're really speaking to is this notion of the power of, clean sobriety for at least a year. And before that, the person isn't really ready to take on the transformative process that's offered here in creating a life that goes in a different direction than the vicious cycle that they've been facing for whatever amount of time. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. And what would I offer anybody who's just the 8.7 million or whatever, or billion who are out there? I would only say that I know that all life is a circle, and that there's always hope.
Sure. Yeah.
And that no matter how much pain or agony you've suffered, you're the only one who can choose to heal yourself.
Thank you. That's great.
I may be able to assist or point out some kind of assistance or books or blah, blah, blah to you. You're the one who's going to have to do the work.
Thank you.
You know,
That's great. That's really, really great. Thank you for sharing that. Now, my listeners are going to be really interested in how to follow you or how to be with you, or what if they're they're 1 month into sobriety, but they want to hang on to you or read your books or learn a little bit about what you stand for, or what maybe Boys to Men, or maybe Mankind Project, or maybe who you are as a healer. So tell me and tell my listeners, how can they reach out, or where should they look if they want to stay in touch with you?
best place is my website, StefanJMalecek.com. That's StefanJMalecek.com. COM.
Awesome.
All my books are listed there. You can leave messages for me there. They'll get forwarded to me. The Mankind Project is mkp.org.
It sure is.
And Boys to Men will be a part of that. I'm relatively new to Boys to Men, so I don't know what web address I would use for Boys to Men.
Mm-hmm.
It is international. We're very strong here in Hawaii.
I'm going to taper us off here, and the way I'm going to do that is kind of non-conventional, even for Welcome to Humanity. So here's what you've taken us down some. You've taken us down some heated areas and some hope and hopelessness, actually. So you've taken us into a route of like who we're all made of, like the parts of us that get to really look at ourselves if we choose to. If we don't want to like fill our nasal passages with cocaine or fill our veins with hypodermic, then we might want to take a moment and look at the things you're speaking of. So, yes. Okay, you've taken us there. Now I'm going to ask you in the next couple minutes, do you have a good joke?
Oh my God! I don't know if I have a good joke that I can publicly broadcast.
No, you can, man. It's a syndicated. We'll wipe it out if it's not. Bring the motherfucker. Come on.
Oh man. Okay. Well, all right. I tend to make jokes. I have a lot of Catholic jokes and Pope jokes.
Okay.
Because I grew up Catholic, and I quit the church when I was 13, and so I'm really.
Okay, so you're coming from the source. Bring me a Catholic Pope joke. I'm all about it.
Okay. Well, so there's this guy, and he's golfing, and he hits his golf ball into the woods, and he goes into the woods to retrieve his ball, and here's this leprechaun laying under a log, and the leprechaun says, Sir, please help me get this log off me, and I'll grant you 3 wishes. And the guy takes the log off and says, Look, I don't need any wishes, I'm fine, and he walks off. And the leprechaun says, Oh shit, I'm going to get in trouble with the leprechaun genie here. I didn't give him any wishes. So he says, I know, I'll give him the standard 3, health, wealth, and sex. And so the guy, a month later, the guy hits his ball in the woods again. Here's the leprechaun sitting on the end of the log smoking his pipe. And he says, Hey, how you doing? He says, I'm doing really well, thank you. He said, I just went to the doctor. He says, I'm 62. Doctor says, I got the body of a 20-year-old. He said, well, that's good. I'm so glad to hear that. He said, how's your finances? He said, the funniest thing, ever since I met you, every time I put my hand in my pocket, there's this roll of bills. And the more I spend, the more there seems to be there. I said,
Two out of three so far. I think.
Yeah. He says, well, I'm really glad for you. And he kind of sidles up to him and says, by the way, how's your sex life? And the guy pumps up his chest and pounds on his chest and says, twice a month. The leprechaun looks at him and says, twice a month? The guy says, yeah, it's not bad for a Catholic priest in a small town.
What? Say that line again.
He says, twice a month isn't bad for a Catholic priest in a small town.
I get it. Yes. Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, we waited 59 minutes and 43 seconds for that joke. And I have to say, you got some balls to bring a joke like that at 59:43. So, wow. Awesome, Stefan. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing your truth right here to Welcome to Humanity. Thank you so much for being another esteemed guest, someone that really, really brings the truth and shows the spectacular nature of what we're doing here on this planet. Like, we really did get to shine a light on your extraordinary self, Stefan. And I really hope that was your experience here as well tonight.
Yes, I feel enlightened, Fred. Thank you.
It's great. That's terrific.
This
Awesome.
is really fun, man. It's good knowing you.
Yeah, it's good to interview you. Thank you I'm so glad you had fun. That is the intention. That's really, I mean, what else are we going to do? And to my listeners, it's just a pleasure. If you're still here, which you are, because you wouldn't hear me if you weren't, how enjoyable was that? This was really, really great. And I never met this man. I never really met this man. We talked briefly a few months ago. I think we met on LinkedIn. And that's what you get, folks. That's what you get when you finally get curious about another person, is you get something like this. So, all right, Stefan. Well, I'm going to bid you farewell. I understand. I have some friends in Hawaii this week who are. I'm in a course this week, and they're a really big course. And there's 10 friends of mine who went from the mainland to the Big Island, and so they're there with you.
Oh, wow.
And so I understand the weather. Oh my goodness, everything looks so beautiful over there today and this week. I guess most every day. So continue to rock Hawaii.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of rain. So.
Oh, okay. Life comes and life goes, and you don't really get to say much about whether it rains, I guess, unless you're under 7 years old. And if you're under 7 years old and it rains, you take credit for it. That's just the way this goes. So
pray for rain.
Pray for rain. Exactly. All right. Welcome to Humanity listeners. It's really, really been a pleasure. Thanks for hanging on. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening to the episode. We're going to send you off. We've had Stefan Malecek here. And wow. I said your name right, did I?
Stefan Malecek.
See, this shows that I didn't know the man. Stefan Malecek. All right. Awesome. Super cool. All right.
Yeah.
Let's send you on your way, Stefan. It's been beautiful. Kisses to you, hugs to you, virtual, really high five, brotherhood. Like, bring it. Keep bringing it, my man. It's really been a pleasure. Welcome to humanity, y'all.
As we say here, Fred, ahui ho, until we meet again.
Ahui ho. Okay. Awesome. Beautiful. All right. Take care of yourself. Be safe, everyone. We'll catch you on the next flip side.
Aloha.
So, wow. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And today, with Stefan, there was really an opportunity to get to know a man from the ground up. As it turns out, I had just met him, a couple months ago in a LinkedIn conversation. And then due to all sorts of emails back and forth, he was dropped in as a guest with very little notice. And so it was very agreeable when I checked him out that we could probably meet an extraordinary man. And wow, turns out I was right about that. Like, this guy has everything going on. Who he is as a stand for men, who he is as a stand for boys, who he is as a stand for shamed individuals worldwide, who he is as a stand for his country, or maybe, as I say, for the betterment of his nation, and like who he is for the betterment of humanity comes through with each and every sentence. And what a great deal of passion and compassion that this man is able to display. It was a deep pleasure to be with Stefan during this interview today. And maybe as you were listening to it, you think of a few people who really, really could benefit from listening to this episode. I'm going to ask you to reach out to them right now and invite them to listen and to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Of course, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and really, although it's not much of an effort, it has huge impact for me and the podcast. And that is, take a moment to hit the subscribe button on your own podcast player. I'll be able to send you the latest episodes if you do so. And if you really appreciate what we're doing here, go ahead and leave a review. Subscribes and reviews are the two major ways we can reach listeners with the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And if these conversations we're having, and like this one with Stefan, contribute to your life, then go ahead, pay it forward by subscribing and leaving a review. To catch up on past episodes of the Welcome to Humanity podcast, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. Until next time, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been another wonderful edition of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thank you for listening. Have a beautiful day. Bye for now.